substance equals spin. The propaganda's a win, stress feeding on my tension. My countrymen, they love their fiction. Words are now, it's made with good intentions.
Welcome to 1 of 200, the Politics and Media podcast. Big episode for you all this morning. It is Sunday, the 12th of January. Didn't have a current events episode because we've got a kind of big episode today. I'm joined by special guest Katrina Mitchell-Kouttab. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so very much for having me, and welcome to everyone listening. Thank you for giving me your ears and your time. Just
for people who haven't perhaps heard your name or who haven't been in these spaces, can you give us a quick rundown of where you're from and what you're doing out there?
Sure. So I am Palestinian English. My mother was born in Jerusalem and my family still lives there. I've obviously, being Palestinian, been an advocate for Palestine. You can't help it if you're Palestinian, for all of my life. I have lived in many different countries around the world and settled in New Zealand in the early 2000s. I'm an actress, storyteller, writer, and advocate, background in international politics, and I believe in fairies and magic.
And those last caveats are really important, as our audience will find out. It's been such a horrific time for anyone involved with the political and advocacy side of what's happening in Palestine and occupied Palestine over the last 2 years. As you mentioned, you've been Palestinian all your life and you've been seeing this occur for the last 76, 77 years. We had an article out in the last couple of days, talking about the slow genocide becoming a much more accelerated one, and more correctly would be called a Holocaust at this point, given what is happening in Gaza. And that's not even to discuss what's happening to Palestinians in the rest of the territories, right? So acceleration of the situation in the West Bank as well, worse kind of situation with rights within Israel. When did you start kind of working on advocacy post October 7th, and how did that look to you, and what direction was it immediately taking, I guess?
I mean, it's been an amazing change. I mean, there's been an acceleration of change since October the 7th in 2023. But when you're younger as a Palestinian, Israel has created a really clever PR campaign to try and create this idea that any Palestinian resistance or any kind of Palestinian voice is a terrorist voice. So ever since I was younger, I was told initially to pretend I was Greek when we were living in the UK and in Europe, because otherwise you would be vilified and you would, have, it would be a very unfavorable response that you would get from people because of this use of victimization that Israel uses. That continued on, and you, as a Palestinian, your whole world has been fragmented. So your life has been stolen, your history has been stolen. People value themselves as a person on who they are from their history, from their ancestors. And when you're denied that voice to be able to tell your story, it devalues you as a person. So Palestinians for years, and will continue to find that value, to find that platform to be able to speak. And so that characterizes a Palestinian's life. And then as you reach your 20s and you begin to become more independent, that's when you start looking. Everyone does. Everybody has their own history. And at some stage during your life, whether it's when you're younger or older, you will want to find out where you're from and who you are and who your family is. And when you see the injustice, and when you have family there, and myself, I've been put through some horrible experiences going to Palestine or occupied Palestine. You fighting back against it. It's a natural human reaction to do that. And so I started off in my 20s trying to educate people, because that was the first thing that we needed to do. There has been such a blanketing and shadowing of the reality of a colonial settler state. And then as you start getting older, you then look into, well, how can I change the policies around me? What can I do to try and influence the government so that the Israeli lobbies and the Jewish pro-Zionist lobbies that are involved very heavily within those halls of power, how can we try and change that narrative? From October the 7th, everything has just culminated very, very quickly in a fantastic stage for Palestinians and those pro-Palestinian supporters. So now we're at the kind of on the brink of this cliff where below us has been opened up this cavern of reality of the history of Palestine and what has actually happened. And we're getting much more traction on a global stage, but being in the West, we still have now a huge battle in regards to being heard in the media that is still silencing us, especially, in the West and in New Zealand, and trying to put our foot into the halls of power, which, the doors are still very much closed to us. And the influence of the Israeli Jewish lobby and the Christian Zionists hinders a lot of the work that we do. And can I say that the Palestinian work we do aligns with international law and the rights of you and me and your civilian rights. And so those entities working against the Palestinian voice are working against international law and are obstructing justice and the accountability of violations against all humans, all civilians around the world.
Yeah, it's this really interesting, and I hate to use words like interesting. I guess just horrible or horrid delineation between the West and everyone else, where, the majority of countries are supporting every UN resolution, right? To stop what's happening. The majority of countries understand what is going on. There is media out there if you're reading stuff that's coming out of the global south, if you're even reading stuff coming out of Israel itself, which has more information about the genocide, that is more willing to call it that than anything that you see in a Western media outlet or hear from a Western politician. And I think one of the, you're talking about the way things have changed and everything has opened up. This concept of Hasbara, the Israeli PR machine, has been getting traction. Like, people are starting to understand exactly how that works. And, this recent decision to give hundreds of millions more dollars for their PR campaign. Like, why do you need one of those, folks? The question for me, I guess, is, and I wonder if you're able to speak to this at all, how much of that gets back to the general Western public? Because I know I have seen, online and in like people who are already in these kind of media and politics spaces who might not have known previously, they absolutely know now. There are absolutely no excuses. If someone is siding with Israel about this at this point, it is not for lack of knowledge about what is happening. It is an active choice, but it still feels like, because of the way in which politicians and media just do not talk about it. It has been it's not even in New Zealand. It's not even that they're taking the side of Israel. It's that they're not talking about it at all. I'm not entirely convinced that people, like your average member of the public, would have picked up the same influx of knowledge to the extent that people who are searching for it would be.
No, I mean, there's definitely a lack of education in New Zealand across the board of all international events and what's happening internationally. And we really need a complete overhaul of our journalism and our media outlets here, because it's, part of journalism is about opening people's eyes to the good and the bad and criticizing and passing on information. And it just doesn't do that in New Zealand. But I mean, it all comes down to the fact that I believe that the biggest threat that we have in our modern world is Israeli and US hegemony. and their desire to continue this colonial settler project, which the US has never stopped. I mean, when it invaded Iraq, that was probably the biggest violation that we've ever had of international law since 1945, since Germany in World War II. And no one said anything about it. And that crossing of the red line opened the doors for why we're having a genocide in Palestine today. The issue that we've got is we still have this current New Zealand government and other Western governments wanting its foreign policy to align with the US and create these stronger ties. And because of that, they're scared of saying or doing anything that could possibly put them offside with the US. And what that does is that then equals this political neutrality and this inaction that we see. And we have for Palestinians, neutrality is a false word, because if you're neutral, and we've been talking about this within schools in New Zealand, because there has been a massive anti-Palestinian racism against children in schools, and many Israeli school children, my children included, I've had Israelis in their school coming up to them and saying, "Are you enjoying the bombs? I hope your family are happy under the rubble." Like horrific things that have been said.
And that comes straight from the parents.
It comes straight from the parents. And then the school says, "Oh, but we need to be neutral." There is no such thing as neutral. When you have this power imbalance between this horrific Israeli onslaught and violations of international law, human rights, and then you've got a defenseless population, neutrality means that you're siding with that who is the more powerful. So this government's political neutrality and inaction has put them now in a really difficult position. They don't want to criticize Israel. They, all the other Five Eyes are discouraging any kind of criticism of Israel. There's this pro-Israeli bias from Western countries who continue to provide military aid and diplomatic support to Israel, at the same time completely neglecting and undermining Palestinian rights, and Palestinian rights are now synonymous with human rights and civilian rights worldwide. And then you've got on top of that the US style policies, which are this double standard, selective kind of selective adherence approach to international law. Yes, we'll condemn Iraq here, or we'll condemn Russia, but then we won't. I mean, they've just condemned Sudan militia. I mean, how can you condemn the militia in Sudan and then not look at what the Israeli IDF, or the offensive forces, we like to call them, the IOF, are doing in Palestine? So for New Zealand and for us and for the media, this reach of the Israeli lobby, this reach of the desire to adhere to the US has really strong domestic implications in how we begin to see things and we do things. Hasbara is a very, very successful Israeli PR campaign that had began at the beginning of the Nakba of 1948 in trying to shift historical narratives. And they lie. It's just complete lies. I'm being honest. It's complete lies all of the time. They promote Israel as this beacon of democracy in the Middle East. And they emphasize their technological and scientific advancements and how amazing it is for the rest of the world, and delegitimize Palestinian narratives and completely cover over the horrific massacres. And when we're talking about massacres, and we'll get on to why Judaism is not synonymous with Israel, and why we have to protect that the worldwide religion from the horrors that Israel is creating.
I mean, that's a nasty piece of Hasbara itself, right?
Yeah, but we have to be honest. We have to be honest that in 1948, with the Nakba, there were Jewish Zionist militia and Holocaust survivors that came over on the SS Exodus from the US with weapons. Some of those weapons were from Germany, and they used them against the Palestinians. And what you saw happening in 1948 is an echo of what you're seeing right now, except it's on steroids right now, and it's an industrialized form. So pregnant women's bellies were cut open in 1948. My great-grandma was shot in the chest many times as she staggered towards her family with a mattress after being told she was allowed to go back in the house to collect something because they were coming back in 2 weeks. And so you have the burning of families in their homes where they lobbed grenades in 1948. They tied Palestinians to trees and they burnt them. They ran them over on the ground in trucks. And all of that history, all of those atrocities have been covered over. And so what you're seeing now is the uncovering of that story, which is creating problems for governments. It's creating problems for their narratives. It's creating problems for where they want to go in their foreign policy. And New Zealanders need to ask themselves, why is this government wanting to align with a country that is complicit in these horrific crimes, and itself, its budget, its internal domestic financial situation is in real trouble? And so many of us see this hegemony as having a very small life, like America's US is on its way down. And then you have this government, this New Zealand government, saying, oh, let's go and help in Yemen. But this has nothing to do with Gaza, by the way, guys. We're just really concerned about trade and these trade routes. Well, this government needs to answer to the New Zealand public, because Israel's just expanded its military action into Yemen with airstrikes on the Houthis, or they call them on Houthis, but we know that civilians have been killed. So now you have the New Zealand government involved with America and Israel and UK in targeting Yemen and telling us on the one side, no, this has got nothing to do with what's going on over there. So they need to be honest. They need to be transparent, and they need to be clear about what this means for New Zealand in moving forward. How does this reflect in New Zealand's national interest? What are we getting out of this? Does this put us in a security situation that is unfavorable for New Zealand? What are we spending in doing that?
Yeah, it's one of these questions, right? Like, I mean, the answer is nothing. We're getting nothing out of this. It is what people call price of access to the club, right? And it's a club that, why do we want to be a part of it? Why do we want access to this club at this point? And this is a question I've been putting to people for the last 4 years, as we've seen this also accelerated, I guess, alignment with the US military complex.
Yeah.
Like, do you want this to be happening under Trump? And I don't like Biden either. Like, this is his genocide as far as I'm concerned, in many ways, in the way that he has provided the arms and the aid to Israel to undertake it. But people who are closer to center than I am, or center right, or etc., they still have this belief that the US is, I can't even say it with a straight face, really. But somehow, like, some kind of leader of the free world kind of shit. And they intentionally forget that these people only have a 4-year term. Okay, look, take your lies about Biden having no choice or being bullied into it by Netanyahu or whatever. Trump's not going to be. Like, everything that the same political group believes is tied up with their political tribalism around, like, Democrats and Republicans. Why are we accelerating in this direction to try and align with US military interests when we've got a far right, like, has been called a fascist, end of democracy president, taking over in 8 days?
There isn't. The answer is, you're right. There isn't any. And that's why I feel it's a misguided government. And we'll talk about David Seymour's support for the Zionist Federation, which is hugely problematic, especially him coming into Deputy Prime Minister for New Zealand. And Luxon should be looking into that. And in fact, if people want to do something, they should be writing letters towards this Prime Minister, to our Prime Minister, asking about that at this point, and we can go into that. But America's completely lost its, US is lost its standing in the world. It is seen as double standards, as liars. It's the global South laughs at the West, and they don't like what we're doing, understandably. And if you look deeper into it, this government, it talks about promoting peace and the two-state solution. Well, promoting peace is not going into Yemen and bombing the crap out of them. Promoting peace is saying, well, what are the Houthis asking for? They're asking for a ceasefire, and they're asking for Israel to get the hell out of Palestine, and that is enshrined in international law. So this government is going against international law. And if you look at the figures at the moment, There are 56 conflicts globally. 92 countries are, as we speak, fighting outside their borders. And 90 countries in the last little while have increased their militarization and spending. We are spending $19.1 trillion in 2023, just in 2023. And in that time frame, 160,000 people were killed, 110 million people fled their homes. And if you're looking at the challenges that we've got in regards to the spending and what's been going on, you have $2.443 million US that have been spent. And if you look at their last little bit, the 43 billion, that's 4 times more than it's been spent on peace building. So we have to really look at where we're heading. And we have to look at what this government's actually standing for and where it's pushing the New Zealand population, because you can't say on one term that we're a peaceful nation. We've got this beautiful historical, stance of anti-nuclear, of promoting peace, of having an independent foreign policy, and then it's being absolutely shredded and shattered and blown up in the last few years by this desire to suddenly move towards these Western powers that are acting with impunity and destroying the very foundations that keep us all safe.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating to watch that happen, and to, as you say, we just want, just as a baseline, people should be following the international law that they claim gives them the power to do things in the first place, right? But it's completely, that's completely over now, as far as I'm concerned. Like, that is not something that's ever going to have standing again unless something really drastic happens.
And it is with people, it is with people. We do have to say that there are, what you're not seeing, and we've talked about this non-coverage in the media, which is a real problem. And you've got people like Rupert Murdoch who are openly supporting, Israel. And that's the reason why, unfortunately, we're at a state where you've got these conglomerates and a few individuals that have control over something that, most people will access. And so they, same with Zuckerberg and all of them. So we've got this real control of misinformation and information. And so for us in New Zealand, because we don't see that, and because we're not aware of that, it's a difficulty for people to know where we're going, or to ask questions and to say, what is New Zealand? What does it stand for? What I don't understand is that we've got this beautiful tangata whenua. We have our Māori family here in New Zealand, which we have obligations to. And so this government has an obligation and has to be honest about our historic past. And yet they're siding, and they are siding because of their lack of robust action with the US, who is completely tied in with Israel, who are obliterating an indigenous population. And not only that, they are violating every single international and humanitarian law that you could possibly imagine. So it doesn't make any sense. And we do have to start looking at how we as individuals can change that, because the people around the world are standing up. Governments may not be, but don't forget the masses of people that you don't see here on TV in New Zealand. You don't hear about it.
Yeah.
But I've found these numbers, which I think is really, really important. There were 26,000 demonstrations of Palestinian rights in 2023, 619 cities across 20 European countries are standing up.
But that's just in 2023.
Yeah, against genocide. So you're looking at Belgium, Ireland, Spain, who have sided with South Africa within its case. New Zealand has not, which is a shame, an absolute shame on our history, a stain on our history. They've recognized the Palestinian state, which this government should have done. It's not following international law. It's saying, oh, we support the Palestinian statehood. No, you don't. If you support Palestinian statehood, you would have recognized the state of Palestine a year ago. Then you've got, even in Italy, in Italy, I love this. These are the Italians. So the Italian Palestinian supporters recently won a case against the Italian state television Rai, which incorrectly referred to Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And let me make New Zealanders aware of this. Jerusalem is not the capital of Israel. Israel has no jurisdiction over that area. It is not a part of Israel. They've already stolen most of our land to begin with, and they're not going to steal Jerusalem. And they won because it's not the capital of Israel. And so in the court case, the television station had to apologize and correct its misinformation
And
and
it's such a complete,
disinformation.
like, just lack of knowledge, like, to the extent that it had to be intentional, right? Like,
Yeah. Well, you have to, because, you've had this. I think it's, really interesting to talk about how the Israeli lobby works and how they're involved in New Zealand.
yeah, I think that's like it's a really important conversation as well, right? Because we talk about both Zionist and US influence over information flows, pressure on the media, the way that groups that kind of within New Zealand that purport to, what's the word, represent all Jewish people, in fact,
Yeah.
do not,
Yeah.
are heavily Zionist, are often like quite far right. And it, as part of their model, is to say, if someone points out that what I'm doing is supporting genocide or genocide complicit or lobbying for genocide, then I can hand wave that away as being anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
And this has been a huge, huge problem. It's
Yeah.
probably the most successful part of Hasbara is to claim any criticism is anti-Semitic,
Yeah.
completely like against like the reality
Yeah.
of what that is. But at the same time, to by the media not dealing with this information effectively, by politicians not being honest about it, it has also led to a whole bunch of far right people who are often associated with some of these groups. So
Yeah.
people like Candace Owens, who was tacitly supported by groups like the Free Speech Union that try and take this issue and turn it into an anti-Semitic kind of
Argument.
information
Yeah.
space or idea. And it's you see them talking to each other
Yeah.
about it, and
Well, let's
everyone's
talk
like,
about
"What
these
are you going
groups.
on?"
Let's talk about these groups in New Zealand. So, because often you're not supposed to, and there's been a silence over it.
It's
And
crazy.
I'll talk about it. So we've got the Holocaust Center in New Zealand, which is, I'll talk about some of the concerns that I have with them. And they've got the Jewish Council in New Zealand, which there's some huge concerns with what they're doing. You've also got the Jewish National Fund. You've got the Zionist Federation in New Zealand. All of them have really strong ties. Interesting to know that Canada has just stripped them of their charitable status, which is I love, because of the international law, which we should be doing here in New Zealand. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. So let's talk about Israel and let's talk about anti-Semitism. So people here can actually get a bit more of an understanding, which I think is really important. So criticism of Israel refers to you opposing the policies and the actions of this terrorist Israeli government. The occupation of Palestinian territory, settlement expansion, the apartheid, starvation, the raping, the shooting, the bombing of hospitals, the list goes on. White phosphorus, it's horrific. Raping doctors and healthcare workers. Anti-Semitism is a prejudice or discrimination against Jews as a religious ethnic group. There's a huge distinction with both.
And a very easy
So
distinction.
easy. So what these groups try and do, and the Holocaust Center of New Zealand is involved in this, which is a disgrace, and so is the Jewish Council. They conflate, or they add those two together. They add political critique and prejudice as being the same, which it is not. They then assume that every single Jew identifies and supports the Israeli policies, which is completely inaccurate. It is misinformation, and it is a disrespect to many Jews around the world who are absolutely amazing and who never at all would conflate themselves with Zionism at all. So then you have this idea that once you say any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, which it is not, and any criticism of Israel is criticizing Jews, which it is not, what are they trying to get out of that? What are they trying to do? What they're trying to do is create and stop any free speech or discussion on what Israel's doing. It's a way to say, hey, don't talk about it, don't talk about it, shut them up so they can't see what Israel's actually doing. It means that you're not allowed to talk about Palestinian rights. It means that anyone who tries to support Palestine is then called anti-Semitic. It delegitimizes our narratives. It basically says, no, you can't talk about your history. You're not allowed to talk about what we did in 1948 and how we massacred you and we stole your houses and we kicked you out, and then we've created this world of apartheid. The Jewish Council labels criticizing Israel as anti-Semitic. So it delegitimizes my account of my suffering, my displacement, my oppression, and shifts the focus away from addressing human rights and violations into a wrongful anti-Semitic debate. It's done on purpose. It's done very, very cleverly, and then puts the Palestinian on the defensive, or anyone trying to talk about Palestine on the defensive. It harbors anti-Semitic motives. So anyone who wants to talk about Israel is considered anti-Semitic, which undermines my ability to get broader government or public support. My experience of my family in the Nakba is downplayed or dismissed when Israel is brought up, when they use the word anti-Semitic. It reinforces the power of imbalance when one side dominates the discourse of another because they're using anti-Semitism to hide the violations that have been committed. And it excludes and deepens societal division. They have weaponized anti-Semitism, which is a disgrace. It alienates those who may have or want to support human rights and move forward in peace and create a better world, because people are scared after the Holocaust in 1945. Well, if we say anything against Israel, we're being anti-Semitic, so we can't, which is completely wrong. But many Jewish voices and individuals in New Zealand and globally, like Jewish Voices for Peace, If Not Now, etc.,
Diana here in
they
New
are
Zealand.
amazing. They don't equate criticizing Israel to anti-Semitism, and they've stood up for that. They've been very, very clear, very, very clear about that. I'm just going to find some of the things that they've actually said, which I think is really important. I know that Marilyn Garson has recently written a book, Jewish Not Zionism, which is really important if people are interested in this particular argument to go and read it. But they emphasize that the core Jewish values, which are, and you tell me whether these Jewish values equate with Israeli policies, yeah? Justice, compassion, and the pursuit of peace. How is that compatible with Israel's policies of occupation, apartheid, and violence? It's not. It's not. And that's why they're angry, because they're being hijacked. Their beautiful religion, who they are as gorgeous people. I know some of the people in Dayanu, they're stunning. I absolutely love them. They're very clear about Judaism not being synonymous with the state of Israel, because that also fuels anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Because people are horrified at what's going on in Israel. They're horrified at the Israeli public, these IDF soldiers, parading their disgusting violations on TikTok and
it's
around
being used by
social
the far
media.
right. And, it's
Yeah.
being used by actual Nazis and white supremacists.
Yeah.
And to the extent that, as I said, some of these groups work directly with people promoting those ideas. And, if you're at that point as a state, as Israel is, if you're at that point where you are tacitly or otherwise supporting people who want to openly say they want your extermination out of expediency, like, you really have to fucking turn around and look at yourself. Like, it's been just the most harrowing thing to watch that kind of unpacked and unfold, and see where the attacks are aimed, in the media, in lettering campaigns towards people, and threats of legal action, or just like, what do you call it, like online aggression, you know?
Shaming people and silencing people
Yeah,
and
it's
attacking their character, which is disgusting.
as if like we haven't seen them like hanging out with some of the worst people in the fucking world.
Yeah.
Like yeah, it's really bizarre, and a lot of the people who are in leadership positions in these organizations are still given the benefit of the doubt.
They are without, and and that's, but Israel's been given the benefit of the doubt.
I guess that's part
You
of it.
hear that, and it's not Palestinian, you're talking about international doctors' voices from all over Europe, from all over the world. They have consistently said since October the 7th, 2023, they have not seen one militia, not one fighter in any of the hospitals. They've not treated one Hamas person in any of the hospitals. Israel has never produced 1 inch of information of evidence to suggest any of the lies that they've perpetrated. Not one bit of information, no evidence whatsoever. They've been asked by the UN, by the ICC, consistently provide us information, provide us the evidence. They have said no. They have been unable to do so. And yet we still believe them,
Yeah, it's
you
this
know?
thing, right?
And then this evidence just recently, there's been no evidence, and the whole rape and the burning of babies on
Yeah,
October the
yeah.
7th has been debunked. What has this government said about that? They designated Hamas recently. They stood up for Israel's, and this is one thing that gets me really wild. If everyone goes onto the MFAT website, I'm really appalled and really concerned that in their 4 pillars that they have of their foreign policy, they have very clearly marked Israel has the right to self-defense. And there's nothing about Palestinian having the right. And this is within the context of Israel and Hamas, they've called it. They've used Hamas instead of Palestinians, completely, once again, obliterating who we are as a people, negating our history, conflating all of us with Hamas. And it's incorrect. Israel, as the occupying power under the 51 of the UN Charter, it does not have the right to
Yeah, it's
self-defense.
counter to international law.
It's our government is not being correct, honest, and it's not following international law. But if I can say to our listeners, your duty, if you support the Jewish people, if you support the history of what happened in 1948, our international legal system grew and was born from the ashes of the Holocaust to prevent never again. Your job is to distinguish Judaism from Israel. So you must not conflate this idea of Judaism with the state of Israel, because then you're putting all Jews collectively responsible for the horrific actions of Israel. And that's not okay. That in itself is inherently anti-Semitic, which is what I believe the Jewish Council and a lot of those organizations are doing. You need to respect their religious identity. It's a faith that's practiced by millions worldwide, and it's completely independent of Zionism. But in saying that, you must be realistic and honest about the fact that Zionism is not one thing. It has morphed and changed since its inception in the late 1800s. And there is a Zionism involved with Judaism. There is a religious Judaic Zionism, as you've seen with Ben Gvir. But you need to be aware of this and to be clear about how these lines intersect and how you make sure that you're standing up for human rights and you're not doing what Israel and these groups are doing to us, conflating all of us as these terrorists that just want to kill people. So what is good for one should be good for the other. And then
It's been pretty easy for people to understand that not all Christian Zionists, or not all Christians are Christian Zionists, right?
Yes.
And we did a podcast like last year with a Christian guy who'd been over to Palestine.
It's
And
Cole Yeoman.
no, this is James. And he was
It's
saying
common grace, Teodora.
no.
No, okay.
And yeah, he was saying like the majority of Zionists are Christian Zionists. That's who's funding this, that's where the money's coming from. And that is a point that just doesn't seem to be made at all. And this is where that US support is coming from in large part. The funding and the arming.
Yeah, and it is, and this is, you know, the Christian Zionism. That's partly what created the state of Israel, which is an artificial creation. It's that support. I mean, we know that a lot of the Western countries didn't want any of the Jewish refugees after the Holocaust, and instead of supporting them, because it's their fault that the damn thing happened in the first place, instead of supporting them, they made their problem our problem.
Mm-hmm.
We as Palestinians never had any issues with Jews. Jews were Palestinians. Can I say that?
Yeah.
But in the Middle East, Palestinians, it's not just Muslims. Palestinians are a combination of three different faiths. You've got Christians, you've got Jews, and you've got Muslims. All of those were this Palestinian people. And as Palestinian people, we have been invaded over the years, oh gosh, by so many different countries, you know, so many different forces. And that has given us such a beautiful kind of flavor of who we are and who we've turned out to be. So this Palestinian, to divorce this idea that Jews have nothing to do with Palestine when it comes to Palestinians is an absolute lie. That's where, and they're completely different. So European Jews don't have anything to do with Palestine. Those European Jews that landed on my shore, killed my family, took my history and my home, don't have one drop of DNA association or blood with Middle Eastern, which is why it is against the law in Israel to do one of those DNA tests. It is against the law. You can't do it because people like Netanyahu and all of them, they weren't born, they have nothing to do with Middle East. They're all Eastern European or European.
Well, it's a colonial project, right?
Of course, it's a colonial. Yes, it's a colonial. So Israel's establishment is created by dispossessing and ethnic cleansing Palestinians, which is known as the Nakba. It's occupation, it's apartheid, it's systemic discrimination that's continued for over 75 years. It is settler colonialism. Settler colonialism, what is it? It's where an external population displaces the indigenous people and then establishes dominance. However, the difference with Israel, as opposed to places like New Zealand and the US and Canada and Australia, who are all supporting Israel, surprise, surprise, bing, 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 is that Israel has never addressed and will never redress or reconcile its colonial foundations. They're not honest. And I'm asking for those Jewish groups now, for the Jewish people to stand up and acknowledge the fact that 1948 was a massacre and that your ancestors were involved in that. And you need to stand up and say that it was wrong. And the creation of the state of Israel was based on a colonial settler project. Don't just focus on October the 7th and what's happening in Palestine now. It's not Gaza, by the way, it's Palestine. They keep differentiating. We are Palestinian. It's not Gazans, we are Palestinian. It's against Palestinians and Palestine. You need to stand up not just for what's happening now, but you need to go back and be honest about 1948 and stand up about what happened in 1948. And when you talk about this phrase, which is really important as well, Israel's right to exist, it's a very interesting concept here because it's being used to silence the criticism of its policies and its actions. This right to exist is very, very rarely tied to conditions of justice, of equality, or reparations for Palestinians. It just becomes this blanket justification for this violence and this dispossession. So if you support this right to exist of Israel, as this government is doing, without acknowledging the conditions under which Israel was created, and how it continues to operate, it means that you are implicitly supporting the denial of Palestinian and human rights, which is what this government has continually done. It's just used this October the 7th as a starting point, which is complete and utter rubbish. So when we move into, for example, the Holocaust Centre of New Zealand, and these are the issues that I have with the Holocaust Centre of New Zealand, it conflates the Holocaust remembrance with uncritical support for Israel. And therefore, its advocacy, unintentionally or intentionally, undermines Palestinian narratives and rights. It emphasizes the Holocaust as a justification for Israel's creation, overlooking the fact that Palestinian displacement and our suffering were direct consequences of the establishment of this artificial state. When you frame that, you then risk presenting this opposition to Israel's policies as then opposing Jewish survival or identity, which is wrong. That again is anti-Semitic in my book. So when you frame the Holocaust as a reason why Israel needs to be created, you're then endorsing Israel's policies. And the Holocaust Center of New York, I wrote them a letter, I wrote them an email a few weeks ago. I said, hey, look, on your website, you talk about this Israeli mob, the football mob in Amsterdam.
Yeah, wow.
You conflated that with Kristallnacht, and we've had the organizers of Kristallnacht say out, this has got nothing to do with what happened with those football hooligans. It's not anti-Semitic. It was in different parts of the city. It was different. Why people shouldn't be conflating. So I wrote to them and I said, hey, why are you conflating Kristallnacht with the Israeli football hooligans? Why are you saying that they're somehow related and it's anti-Semitic? And by the way, if you're really into human rights, why haven't you mentioned anything about Palestine? And why in this response, this article that you put, you never mentioned what the Israeli football hooligans were saying, which were disgusting.
Which is on video everywhere.
Yes. So they have failed to acknowledge our displacement, our Nakba, and this includes Yad Vashem in Israel, which is actually built a few hundred meters. This is how I find this quite upsetting and really quite horrific. Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Center in Israel. It is built a few hundred meters away from Deir Yassin, which is the most horrific massacre that we have in 1948. Look it up, people. Deir Yassin, where they shot and killed every single man, woman, and child in that village. And when I do talks, I show pictures of the bodies wrapped up in white sheets in Deir Yassin, black and white pictures, and people think it's Gaza now. It's so similar. It's quite horrific. Yad Vashem, they ask people to go and take their trees. This is what the Jewish National Fund does. It disguises this forestation with completely obliterating and canceling out Palestinian villages and Palestinian towns. There is not one Palestinian town, not one Palestinian city that has not been built over by Israeli cities and villages. They ask them, this is how warped it is, they ask them, any international visitor, to take a tree and go and plant it in Deir Yassin without knowing where they're planting or what they're doing. So
that's evil.
It is. So you've got the Holocaust Center of New Zealand failing to acknowledge our suffering or our Nakba. They're not advocating for us. It's one-sided. They're reinforcing this narrative that excludes our history. And therefore, my perception is then, what are you prioritizing Jewish suffering over everybody else's? If you're here to demonstrate how important human rights are and never again should be never again, why are you not using your platform to promote reconciliation by including Palestinian perspectives and fostering discussions about our shared history and our suffering? Because otherwise you're just promoting these divisions. You're not being honest about it. So if they wanted to have more of an inclusive approach and really fight discrimination and strengthen their credibility, they should be fostering solidarity across communities, and that should start with Palestine. And that's exactly what the Jewish Council does. So it does what we've just talked about with this idea of anti-Semitism, and it aligns with Israel. It supports their policies. So we have these organizations who are very influential within government ministries, who are supporting violations of international law, who are supporting the potential of World War III, who are completely alienating and disrespecting our Palestinian heritage and what happened in 1948. And they're being given platforms and being treated with absolute respect.
Yeah, it's been one of the more frustrating things to deal with, is just how difficult it has been to get anything into the into the media from our perspective.
It's completely blank. We can't. I have sent,
No.
I don't know how many articles I've sent. Asia Pacific Report's been fantastic.
Yeah,
Some of
Tanaka,
them,
I think's done some stuff.
yeah, but nothing. It's like we don't even get a response. We've been
No.
completely, and that's intentional.
Well, the one time early on when RNZ had Tamim on, and they just edited out every use of the term genocide.
No, the government won't talk about
Yeah.
genocide now.
No.
And that's part of the issue. That's part of the problem. You know, you've got this government who's called out Hamas. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I will anyway. When I had meetings with government ministries, it was we made it very, very clear when they were designating Hamas, hey, why are you doing it during a genocide? You're the only country doing it. It makes no sense that you would do this when Hamas is a governing body and we need to get money to our families. We need to get aid to people. You are then saying that if we give money and somehow it goes through a Hamas controlled organization and as a government that is about administrative as well as the military wing, which you've now combined as one, the administrative wing, how the hell are we supposed to get money in? We're sending it to our family. We don't support Hamas. We don't all support Hamas. Yet how many options are there for us to ensure that humanitarian aid and to ensure that you are following this government international law by supporting civilians who are being massacred and genocided by Israel? Oh, no, 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 no. They said, no, 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 things will be fine. It'll be all right. You'll find your way. Don't worry. Well, someone who supports Palestine had a knock on their door just recently. The police were standing there and they were alerted by a bank in New Zealand to say, are you selling Palestinian products and how are you getting them from Palestine? And you're supporting Palestinian aid. So we need to investigate how you're supporting this aid. They came in without, under the terrorism laws, if you're you'd want to investigate someone for potential terrorist activities, and this terrorist activity is a person sending money to Gaza to families and to organizations by selling goods. That's their terrorism. You have to have substantial evidence. They had no evidence. They walked in, wanted to talk, wanted to find out how, when, where, what, whatever, left without anything, and then said, oh, maybe we'll come back in 3 weeks. So it's disgusting.
Yeah.
So that needs to be looked at. That needs to be investigated. But where has the condemnation from this government been to Israel's actions and war crimes? But it's referred to our situation, and this is so disrespectful, complex.
Oh God.
Catastrophic, tragic, lots of hand wringing.
Yeah. What are you doing about it then, right?
They're doing nothing.
Yeah.
They're doing nothing. They'll claim that they've been involved in the UN, supported the UN resolutions. They'll claim that they have targeted Israeli settlers by travel banning them. These Israeli settlers, what, they're going to come to New Zealand?
Yeah, I think they're settling. They're too busy settling to come to New Zealand.
I mean, it's you just diplomatically, what have they done? Oh, behind closed doors, we're telling Israel off. Really?
They haven't even expelled the ambassador, right?
Yeah.
Like,
you think that's strong enough? And then on the other hand, as we were talking about, we've got David Seymour's relationship with the Zionist Federation, where he has repeatedly expressed uncritical support for Israel.
and he's had MPs who have gone even further, I think.
Yeah,
like Simon Court.
Yeah, aligning government narratives with support for a pariah state who are violating the very international laws and institutions and conventions that New Zealand has signed up to. So his unwavering support for Israel will lead to this biased foreign policy, which then compromises New Zealand's obligation to uphold international law and human rights. And it alienates a massive part of the community, not just Palestinians, but there's a growing community in New Zealand, as there is internationally, who are standing up against the horrors that they're seeing, this genocide that we're watching on real time, which people, I've quit my job. Many Palestinians can't cope. We've quit the jobs. We're having heart problems. And not just us, but those who are watching who aren't Palestinian are having emotional and physical reactions this government's ignoring. And it's huge, like it's massive. But he then will undermine democratic values, because if you advocate for one side policy, then what you're doing is you're suppressing public discourse on Palestine. You're hindering my activism and potentially violating my free speech and democratic participation. And you're compromising your leadership. You can't be deputy prime minister if you're aligning with Zionist organizations, and you're therefore not impartial, and therefore you're not representing all New Zealanders, especially marginalized communities. And then you're tilting your policies toward pro-Israel, towards this pro-Israel stance.
Well, it's pro-genocide at this point.
It is pro-genocide. So that needs to be that really needs to be addressed before he comes into his tenure.
Yeah,
Because
like good luck though, right? Like,
yeah,
who's gonna? Yeah, the frustrating thing is that any of this could be used to put pressure on the government if a mainstream media outlet decided to.
oh, exactly. And I
And we've
hope
just
they
decided not
do.
to.
Because I mean, you've seen on the other side of it how many of these fantastic, media outlets have now sprouted that I keep encouraging New Zealanders, look at Double Down News, go to Middle East Eye, look at Al Jazeera. Don't go to your media channels because they don't give you anything.
No.
Have a look at them if you want to get, a dog jumping over a fence with a rose in its mouth, and have a look at someone, how quickly they can eat a pie. Great. Have a look at that and have a good laugh. But if you want to find out about what's happening in your world, because we are not disconnected, we are all connected. And what happens in Palestine is going to affect you and your grandchildren and how we move forward in this world, because Israel and America and the UK and now New Zealand and Australia, Canada and European countries are undermining the UN and those very institutions that we rely on to keep safe in this world. And there's a great debate about that at the moment, about whether it will crumble completely and will continue into this complete lawlessness that Israel is demonstrating for the rest of the world, or whether we'll start fighting back. And the argument is, well, you know what? The system is broken. The UN is broken. It doesn't mean it's bad and it's not done fantastic things. It's done amazing things. It's created the UN Charter, the human rights. It's the UN for women. It's done aid. It's done incredible things. But what needs to happen now? It needs to be rethought. It needs to change. We need to get the veto votes in the Security Council completely and utterly banished. The whole world is changing. China is becoming more important. Those middle line countries, India, you've got the global south. Many more people now, countries, are beginning to rise up, and they're beginning to show more of an influence in this move away from the West, this move away from the US dollar. And we need to be aware of that. Otherwise, we're going to be left behind, and we're going to be in that camp of these are the baddies, and these are the people we don't want to deal with.
And the baddies are the ones
flouting international law.
Or like saying, we want to stop the genocide, right? Like,
no, they won't even use the word genocide. This government refuses to. It's disgusting. They won't.
No. I mean the people that the US and Western and Five Eyes are claiming are the bad guys are the ones that are across the fence from what's happening in Palestine. Yeah, it's horrific. What's it in terms of trying to meet with ministers or do advocacy at the political level? What has been happening there? I do want to try and get to that before we wrap things up.
Yeah, we're trying. It's been really disappointing. So, Erica Stanford has been a disaster for us. We've asked to meet with her and Winston Peters. And when I say we're talking about a combination of Palestinian groups around New Zealand nationally and Jewish groups around New Zealand nationally. And the door's been shut many times on us. We haven't been able to have the foot in. And yet you see pictures of Winston Peters with the Jewish Council. So it's it's not okay. So it's very difficult for us. We have a voice, we should be heard. And even more so, we're going through a genocide and the most horrific things are happening to us. The least you think they would do, these politicians that represent all of New Zealand and stand for human rights and, the law, would meet those communities that are being affected, but they're not. And that, I'll let people decide for themselves what that means. We've had some success within ministries with the policy with those policy officers, but they ultimately don't have the wand that makes the decisions. They can't wave their wand and say, yep, sure. While they have been, supportive and helpful to a great extent, there's only so much they can do, and they can listen, but they can pass on advice. But the critical problem is that advice being listened to? Is it being blocked in cabinet? How much do those Zionist influences have within those three parties, and what havoc are they playing? And how much then does that desire to align yourself with the US, how much does that have him, play? So it's been relatively, we have not been successful. And considering we have international law behind us, considering there have been demonstrations longer than in any history around the world, let alone in New Zealand, of us going out every weekend demonstrating, we have generally been ignored. We've had support from the Greens and from Labour. And Phil Twyford has been amazing, and Chloe, they've been very supportive, and they are desperately trying to change things and make sure that New Zealand is going on the track that it should be. And that's been difficult but slow. And then there are many different wonderful groups that are working. You've got Palestinian Youth Aotearoa, Justice for Palestine, Jewish Voices for Peace. They've all been working really hard in trying to create strong relationships with MPs so that we can have our voices heard. And we won't stop that. We will continue. It's a hard slog, but once again, as I said, we haven't had a voice since 1948, and this last year or two we've just got our platform. So we're like a newborn baby, not like the ones in the NICU ward that were left to die and rot from Israel, but we are a newborn baby that represent a new path and a new future for Palestinians. And it's going to take little wobbly steps at first before we grow, but we will grow. We're not going anywhere. We're going to get stronger and stronger. And with our advocacy and with our voice, we will create a better world for everyone. And all of you out there have a choice. Which world do you want to live in, and which world are you going to leave your children? Are you going to live in a world where everyone is respected and civilians are given the protection under the international law that they deserve? Or are you going to let yourself be a sitting duck for whatever happens in World War III if that continues in the future?
Well, this is the thing, right? And like there's so little foresight about it. What kind of things have you what are your policy asks if you've been trying to talk with Erica Stanford?
To create a humanitarian visa. I mean, that's for Erica Stanford. I mean, it's been really interesting actually, because
that seems pretty it'd be a
normal.
normal thing to do,
It's
and like a
normal.
really easy thing to do.
It's appalling that she's monitoring a genocide. It's just, there's no other reason she would what do you think? Why do you think that someone would not grant a humanitarian visa to a besieged population experiencing genocide, but you'd grant one to Ukraine?
Because these politicians, they all know what the actual state of affairs are, regardless of what they say.
Of course they do.
Yeah.
And so we've asked for sanctions against Israel. We have asked for condemnation of what Israel has been doing. We've asked for robust action in line with international law. So with the ICJ advisory opinion and the General Assembly resolution, that has triggered third state obligations. So even though...
and the ICC stuff now as well with Netanyahu, right?
So even though it's not binding as such, it still triggers their obligations. So what does that mean for this government? And it hasn't had these conversations, and this should be concerning for everybody. That means now with those that this government cannot support Israel with its occupation of Palestine. Now, Israel's financial situation is inextricably tied with its occupation in Palestine. So how do you differentiate Israel proper I hate using that word because there isn't one as far as I'm concerned with the way they've been acting, but Israel proper with its financial institutions, and then Israel illegal in its occupation in Palestine. You can't. So this government now has a responsibility to say, okay, we need to address our political, we need to address our economic, our cultural, our military, across the board. How are we going to move forward with Israel now with these new international laws? How do we then decide what we can't do and what we can do? Because that's their obligation, and they haven't done it.
Because it's not
done
just an obligation to decouple either, right? Like under the Genocide Convention, there is an obligation to step in and stop it.
Yeah, well, Winston Peters I was so upset with him. He said, oh, yes, well, this whole year thing when Israel's got to get out of Palestine, which they had to do by this September, within a year. Well, that's not really realistic for Israel. My question to him was, well, do you think it's realistic for a population to continue to be bombed for a year? Why are you not concerned about Israel's actions that are killing a people and saying a year is too long for Palestinians? Instead, you're concerned that Israel may not be able to get out in a year of its settlements and its apartheid and occupied Palestine. I know it's so difficult, it's for them to do that.
I don't think they have quite enough US aid.
No,
Yeah.
no, not at all. So it's been a mixed response, but we have hope. There are fantastic people working in government. There are wonderful individuals who are there, and it's just a matter of continuing the great work that's been happening on the ground by all these organizations. And I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all those New Zealanders, many of which have no ties to Palestine at all, but who are working endlessly on the ground to ensure that justice is done, and that the world does turn into a better place. So
as you said, right, we're all part of humanity.
We're all part of it. Even you having me on today to discuss these issues, it's fantastic, and I'm very, very grateful. We're all very, very grateful for that. And Palestinians, we are strong, and we will never ever give up. It's built into our DNA. And so the forces will continue to unite, and will continue to move forward, and will continue to expose those organizations that aren't moving forward with human rights for everybody in mind, and who aren't moving forward in honesty about what is happening, and who aren't moving forward in alignment with international law. We'll continue to rally and work across the board with advocacy and activism.
What's the plan for 2025? What is on the agenda?
Sanctions against Israel, as they should. We'd love the media to become a little bit more to remember its values under journalism.
Yeah, a little more vocal, perhaps.
Yeah, and to include Palestinian voices.
Is there any way to make them do that? That's been a real struggle, as a media organization.
It's the New Zealand people. It's the New Zealand people. You need to demand for that. You need to demand that there is an equitable voice in New Zealand. And if you're not getting it from those organizations, don't watch them. Don't buy the paper. Go watch and buy the stuff that you feel actually gives you more of a voice that houses lots of different perspectives, internationally across the world. So everything really is about collective action.
What happens when and yourself or another member of an advocacy group contacts the media to say, hey, I would like to speak about this, or why haven't you included this viewpoint? How do media respond to that?
They don't. We don't get emails back. Or if there's a complaint towards RNZ or something, because RNZ has done, some really concerning interviews and articles, including interviewing an IDF soldiers in, committing war crimes and it's been horrific. They defend themselves and say, oh no, we're doing, it's not opinion, it's fact. Oh no, we're giving a balanced view. We talk about Palestinians, but if you have a look at the numbers don't lie. How many Palestinians have you had on your shows? How many articles have you had in regards to what's, pro-Palestinian voice as opposed to Israeli? How many times have you interviewed Juliet Moses and not anybody else, or David Kumin? and not anybody else. So, I mean, actions speak for themselves, but usually we don't hear anything back.
That's horrific.
It is. It's
It's
a
an
massive
embarrassment.
problem. Yeah. That's why people stand up. Find the information for, if not for you, for those coming after you, because you have a responsibility to make this world a better place, to leave your legacy. You hear these cliches say it all the time, but as you grow older, the cliches your parents and grandparents used to say to you, don't they ring true? When you get older, you go, oh,
I
I
don't want
get
to
it
think about
now.
getting older.
I get it now. So leave that legacy. It is your responsibility. And what we don't talk about is the eco crisis that we are faced with. I mean, people don't realize the damage Israel's done ecologically, the amount of sewage that has been leaking into from Gaza into the sea
Or just
that's
like
made it.
the remnants of armament, right?
Yeah, and the what like the chemical weapons that have been used and the particles from all of the weapons that
And the
have been,
destroyed buildings.
yeah, the asbestos, etc. Israel as well as Palestine. So the Israelis and Palestinians will face cancers and intestinal problems for the next 50 years because of what's happened, because of what Israel's done. And all the sewage and the things that have been leaking into the sea, it started to create this algae that's been growing, and it's actually moved down the Mediterranean coast into
Whoops.
the Mediterranean now. And that is creating absolute havoc for our ecosystem within the oceans. And the amount of bombs that they have used, I think it's the equivalent of 20 countries' emissions in I don't know how many years. It's horrific. They have murdered animals. They have killed all of the trees. And countries are doing this all over the world instead of spending those trillions of dollars on building peace and making sure that the rich were taxed and that everyone had reasonable food and a reasonable life to live. They're pushing us into the brink of extermination. And we need to talk about that. Look at the wildfires in LA. I
Yeah.
mean, that's because you had a drought and then you had this massive downpour of water, these two kind of opposites within a short period of time, the flourishing growth of all of these plants and these trees that have caused, and the winds because of the climate change, which has caused this. And so we're all affected by it, all of us. I mean,
Yeah.
what New Zealand should be concerned about too, this is coming left of field, but my mind always goes at 100 miles an hour, is the influence of Israel in our Pacific countries around New Zealand. Who voted against in the UN against Palestinian
Well, this is why
rights?
we say it's a US-led genocide, right? Because that's who really has the power here.
Yeah.
This is about projection of US power within the Middle East. And the US certainly has the money to shore up a few votes around the Pacific, eh?
Yeah, well, it's Israel's influence in giving aid in a lot of the Pacific
Right.
countries. Um, and I'm just trying to find, I've forgotten their name. I'm trying to find it. I'll have a look for it. This organization in New Zealand, which is a Zionist
Uh-huh.
organization, that its whole premise is to convert Samoan, Fijians, is to
No
convert
shit.
indigenous populations into the Pacific into Christian Zionism. That is a major problem. It's a major issue that we have, is that now we're surrounded by, Pacific states that voted completely the opposite to, sorry, Pacific countries that voted the opposite to New Zealand and are voting, not in line with international law. And obviously they're influenced very heavily by these international countries.
Mhm.
And that's a security risk for us.
Yeah, it's the same with a lot of we talk about the Atlas network a lot more now, right? Like there are a whole range of groups doing a whole range of influence campaigns.
So this is it. I don't know if people are aware of this, but it's ICFI, founded in 2021 by the former cabinet minister Alfred Nagaro and Cherie Trotter. So it means Indigenous Coalition for
Oh,
Israel.
yeah, no, I do know about this.
So it tries to foster that, those Indigenous voices in support of Israel, which is completely crazy because you're asking an Indigenous people to support a colonial settler state killing other Indigenous people. And so that is part of the reason I believe that there was this, this strange voting from these indigenous populations in the Pacific against the indigenous Palestinian people.
Yeah, I think at least like somewhat thankfully, ICFI are treated like a bit of a joke, at least as far as I know, and haven't been super successful. But the fact that very bad faith, like absurd groups like that have the capacity to exist is, yeah, really worrying.
I mean, in New Zealand should be also looking into the New Zealand Israel Innovation Hub, because
Oh yeah,
most of those startup projects are in the occupied Palestinian
yeah,
territories, you
yeah.
know?
There's a whole bunch of stuff like that.
Yeah, so why aren't they? I mean, these are their obligations where they should be doing that. I mean, there's a lot. They haven't called it a genocide. They've called for a humanitarian pause. I mean, what the
Yeah,
hell is a
we're well
humanitarian
past that. Hey, we're well past that.
ceasefire? I know. Sanctioning Israel, recognizing the state of Palestine, granting the visas, increasing the funding to UNRWA, calling for Israel to end the suffering, explicitly calling out Israel's violations. We heard nothing from this government with the Flower Massacre, nothing from this government when they're bombing the hospitals, and people should be very well aware when they lied about Hamas being tunnels under the Al-Shifa hospital. By now, if you don't know that they have bombed every hospital in Gaza, and every hospital has said not once did they ever see a Hamas militant or any militant or one gun in that hospital, then you've had your eyes closed. And these are sacred institutions protected under international law. And if you think it ain't going to happen to you, think again, because this lawlessness that is occurring around the world, you've got so many countries at war at the moment, and so many countries, 90 whatever countries at war outside of their own country. Then New Zealand is a sitting duck.
Yeah.
It's isolated. We don't have a strong military to protect us. We rely on trade
And being far away.
Yeah, we are. We are far away. We rely on trade. We rely on oil. If we don't get oil, we're stuffed. Fuel is essential to New Zealand in us moving forward. We get most of our medicine from overseas.
Yeah.
And so we are intrinsically affected by what is happening overseas and the destabilization, not just of the region in the Middle East, but those implications worldwide. Because, I remember when I was living in Melbourne, I would go to this lovely little shop around the corner I love food. I love And there were these spinach pastries. And I dived in, and I went early in the morning, had my jog, went to the little shop, and she said, "Oh no, we can't get the spinach pastries in because the spinach that they use in Australia to make the pastries comes from Russia, and the ships are they're not working at the moment." And I'm like, "Are you what?" And that's when I started looking. I thought, hang on, we make all this food in our country, but we don't actually use it because it's shipped overseas.
Yeah.
And therefore, all the spinach that you make here doesn't go to this country. It goes somewhere else, and we have to buy spinach from somewhere else to when I lived in Egypt, I was living in Cairo, which I love Cairo. I miss it terribly. But I would go to this beautiful place called Gourmet Egypt, and I would buy the most incredible cuts of New Zealand lamb or products, milk or cheese or whatever, for a quarter of the price that you buy it here in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And it was quality that you could not even compare.
It really is a really strong example of just how, like, as you've said, like throughout this episode, how intrinsically connected all of this stuff is.
Yeah, it is. And so people, don't be ignorant. Don't say you didn't know. Don't say it doesn't work. It doesn't affect me. It's got nothing to do with me, because you're a part of the problem. Then you're a big part of the problem. And you're a problem not just for yourself, but for your family. And so get off the couch, have a strong cup of coffee or tea, and start to educate yourself. Go to the supermarket, look at those apps. No Thanks, NO, and then Thanks is an app you can download, or the BDS movement online, and stop buying 5 products on your shopping list in the supermarket that are owned by Israeli companies or support Israel. That's all you need to do. You don't need to do too much. Educate yourself, and take some kind of action.
Yeah.
And if you feel more energetic, write to the government, ask them, why haven't they put sanctions on Israel? Why haven't they asked for humanitarian visas? Why has there been no condemnation? Why haven't you kicked out the embassy and shut it down? Why aren't you doing all these things? They've got Justice for Palestine. They've got this great campaign against the ASB Bank at the moment. I was there when they were demonstrating against that tennis player who went, Lena Glushko, who went to play tennis. She's an IDF reservist soldier.
Yeah.
She was in the IDF in 2018, 19, or 20. And she was there during the time of the Great March of Return. And I had discussions with the immigration policy officers and said, what security measures are you taking to ensure that Israelis who have committed war crimes and those who hate Palestinians and who will potentially be a threat to our social cohesion and me as a Palestinian, my security, what are you doing? And they couldn't answer.
No.
They couldn't answer. And so we need to know, as not just as Palestinians, but as New Zealanders, how many of you let in from the occupied Palestinian territories, which is now illegal? How many of you let in that have worked and killed Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories? And
We
what
still have open visas for Israelis, right?
Yeah.
For summer work. You're like, okay, how many of those people were conscripted and have been in Gaza in the last
Right. And then you have Brazil.
2 years.
Brazil, who's been amazing, saying, no, we need to arrest these soldiers. And then if you don't know, as people, what the Israeli Foreign Ministry did, they protected him, put him on a plane and shipped him out of the country before they could arrest him. That is illegal. They are going against Brazil's domestic laws. They are violating Brazil's right. They are violating international law again by protecting their soldiers who should be arrested for war crimes. I mean, come on, people, wake up.
Yeah.
Seriously.
It's definitely coming down the line. If people do want to find out more information, is there anywhere they can find you online or organizations that you're a part of that I can drop into the summary?
Yep, there are plenty of organizations. We have the Palestinian Youth Aotearoa, which they can go online and have a look. We've got the Justice for Palestine, which they can go and have a look. We've got Palestine Solidarity Network Aotearoa, PSNA. They've got Jewish Voices for Peace, the BDS movement. All you have to do is look up history of Palestine and what to do, and a lot of the really good journalistic sites will take you straight to information and what to do. So there's plenty that you can do, and as I said, very easy. Just look up what you're going to not buy and you'll be quite shocked at how many products come from there. But the generally just buy New Zealand made and you ain't going to go wrong.
Fantastic. And if people want to find you online and kind of hear more of what you've got to say, is there anywhere they can do that?
I hide.
Okay, look, and that's
I
totally
usually
fine.
hide. However, I will be at the Wellington Fringe Festival, and that's going to be in February. Just give you the details for that. It's called Colonized Windows of Palestine and Aotearoa from the 14th and 18th of Feb. This year at the New Zealand Fringe Festival, I'll be working with Samat and we'll be doing a performance. Organising an art exhibition that will hopefully go around New Zealand called Whare Palestine, with our Indigenous population and Palestinians working on art, like different multimedia together. And I do write a lot of articles, they just don't get published.
Fantastic. Hey, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for your kindness and your generosity, and we all really appreciate it. So lots of love and lots of arahan, lots of thanks, genuine heartfelt thanks from all of us.
Really appreciate it. And thanks for listening, everybody. Go and find those groups, get involved. 2025 is going to be a year. Things are going to be happening. As Katrina's been saying, a lot of advocacy groups have just been getting their feet under them still in the face of these enormous crises. Get involved, start speaking out. There are so many little steps you can take that will help the movement. So make that your New Year's resolution this year, is to get involved with stopping the genocide in Palestine. That's been another episode of 1 or 200. Everything's in the summary as per usual. Share this around, let people know that there are media voices out there covering this stuff. It's not all an entirely blank slate. And we'll catch you next week. See you then.
If artificers are then I'm living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paved with good intentions. And I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they quote this as a cost we ought to stay. Cause I live amongst the people every day. And it's vindictive